In a world where every stitch can seal a fate, where ancient mansions hold even older secrets, and where not all invitations should be accepted, a simple seamstress is about to discover that there are fabrics that should never be touched, and symbols that should never be embroidered. How much is your soul worth when the payment comes in gold? 7 brides have disappeared. She would be the 8th, unless she can unravel the hidden pattern between the lines. When the Duke saw what the seamstress had done to his bride's dress, he was astonished. A story where each chapter unveils a new mystery, and each revelation brings you closer to the terrifying secret of Ravencrest Manor. This is only the beginning of a journey that will captivate you from the first to the last minute. If you love Gothic mysteries, ancestral secrets, and intelligent heroines, you've found your next obsession. Don't miss any chapter of this thrilling saga. Subscribe to the channel right now and activate the bell to be notified when the next video goes live. Like this video so more people can discover this story and share it with friends who love a good mystery. And most importantly, save this video so you can come back and review the clues you might have missed the first time. Are you ready to discover what really happens when a seamstress defies a duke? The first chapter begins now. The rain fell in thin strands over the narrow streets of Thornfield. In the slanted windows of the stone houses, small puddles formed at the corners of the glass, distorting the view of the outside world. Eliza Reed watched this spectacle of nature while her skilled hands worked almost on their own, weaving delicate French seams into the sleeve of an emerald green silk dress. "One stitch with each breath," she murmured to herself, a mantra her grandmother had taught her. Too fast and the fabric suffers. Too slow and your mind wanders. The small room that served as both workshop and home for Eliza was silent, except for the soft drumming of the rain and the occasional sigh of satisfaction when she completed a particularly difficult row of embroidery. It was this quietness that she valued most, the simplicity of existing in a space of her own, where every object had its place and its story. A sudden click at the door broke her concentration. Eliza blinked, her dark eyes momentarily disoriented after hours of intense focus on the meticulous work. Carefully placing the needle on a small ivory pin cushion, she stood up, smoothing her simple teal dress. "One moment, please," she called out, trying to imagine who might be visiting her on such an inclement afternoon. Upon opening the door, Eliza found no one. Only the wet cobblestone street and the grey sky above. She was about to close it when she noticed a cream-colored envelope on the doorstep, protected from the rain by the small porch. The envelope was elegant, made of quality paper that Eliza immediately recognized as the kind used only by the nobility. The type with linen fibers interwoven that she could feel under her fingers. Sealed with dark red wax, the envelope displayed a crest she didn't recognize, a raven in full flight holding something that looked like a key in its beak. Below, stylized letters formed the words, "House of Voss, Blackmere." With her heart suddenly racing, Eliza looked again at the street, searching for the messenger, but whoever had delivered the envelope had silently disappeared into the rain. She went back inside, closing the door against the damp cold that began to seep in. Sitting again in her favorite chair, a modest piece with a cushion embroidered by herself with lavender patterns, Eliza carefully broke the seal and removed an equally refined sheet of paper. "To Miss Eliza Reed, your exceptional sewing services have been mentioned in the highest circles of society. It is with great interest that I request your presence at Ravencrest Manor, the ancestral property of the Duchy of Blackmere, for work of the utmost importance and confidentiality. Please present yourself at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. Come alone and enter through the back gates, where my housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, will be waiting to receive you. Bring your finest tools and materials. The exact nature of the service will be revealed only in person. I must insist on absolute secrecy regarding this invitation and your subsequent visit. Any mention to third parties will result in the immediate revocation of this opportunity. As a demonstration of good faith and recognition of the inconvenience of such a sudden invitation, I have included an advance payment for your work. Sincerely, Sebastian Voss, 15th Duke of Blackmere. A second envelope, heavier, had slipped out of the first when Eliza opened it. Picking it up from the floor, she felt the unmistakable weight of coins. With slightly trembling fingers, she opened the second envelope and let out an exclamation of surprise. 10 pure gold coins, each worth more than she earned in an entire month, gleamed against the palm of her hand. "Good heavens," whispered Eliza, feeling the real and metaphorical weight of that payment. It was more money than she had ever seen, gathered all at once. Blackmere. The name evoked stories whispered in local taverns, an isolated place wrapped in perpetual mist, dominated by a Gothic mansion that seemed to have sprouted from the very rock. It was said that the Voss family had inhabited those lands since time immemorial, but few in Thornfield could claim to have seen a member of the family in person. Eliza raised her eyes to the small framed engraving she kept on her work table, a landscape of the Blackmere Highlands with its steep peaks and dense forests. It had been a gift from her father many years ago, before the fever took him along with her mother. "What do you think, Father?" she murmured, looking at the image. "An opportunity or a risk?" As if in response to her question, a thunderclap shook the sky, making her startle. At the same time, a flutter of wings at the window caught her attention. An unusually large raven had perched on the outer windowsill, its glossy black feathers glistening with raindrops. The bird tilted its head, its black eyes seeming to watch her with disturbing intensity. Eliza felt a shiver run up her spine. The raven was identical to the one on the envelope's seal. "Did you come to see if I accepted the invitation?" asked Eliza in a low voice, feeling foolish for talking to a bird, but unable to resist the feeling that it wasn't a chance encounter. The raven tapped its beak against the glass, once, twice, 3 times, as if counting. Then, when a second thunder echoed in the distance, the bird spread its imposing wings and disappeared into the intensifying storm. Eliza turned her attention back to the invitation, reading it slowly again. The mention of the highest circles of society intrigued her. Her clientele was modest, some merchant wives, occasionally the daughter of a landowner preparing for the season in London. How had her name reached the ears of a duke? She picked up her teacup, now cold, and took a sip while contemplating her situation. Winter was approaching quickly, and with it the rise in the price of coal and supplies. The roof of her little house would need repairs before the first snow. The gold coins would solve these problems and many others. Moreover, there was something else, a curiosity she couldn't deny. What kind of work required such a level of secrecy? And why her, specifically? Eliza stood up and walked to the aged wooden chest that contained her most precious tools. Opening it with reverence, she ran her fingers over silver scissors inherited from her grandmother, bone needles, so fine they almost disappeared in certain lights, spools of silk thread in colors she personally produced, using secret dyes from flowers and minerals. It was her treasure, her legacy. More than mere tools, they were extensions of her hands, partners in creating small works of art. Tomorrow night then, she decided, closing the chest with determination. Eliza spent the rest of the day organizing her belongings, carefully selecting the best fabrics from her collection, setting aside needles and pins of different sizes. She didn't know how long she would stay at Ravencrest Manor, so she prepared for any possibility. As she worked, she tried to ignore the growing unease in her stomach. The stories about Blackmere were predominantly somber, accounts of inexplicable storms, strange lights seen in the mansion's towers, servants who entered but were never seen leaving those lands again. Nonsense, she muttered to herself. Rumors fueled by idle minds and sharp tongues. Still, when night fully fell over Thornfield, Eliza lit more candles than usual, as if the small flames could ward off not only the physical darkness, but also the shadows forming in her thoughts. That night, her dreams were populated by ravens flying in strange formations, drawing symbols in the night sky. In one particularly vivid moment, she dreamed she was sewing a dress that seemed to absorb the light from the candles around her, as if the very fabric were made of condensed darkness. She woke with a start before dawn, sweaty and with a racing heart. At the window of her bedroom, a single raven watched her in silence before disappearing into the twilight of early morning, leaving Eliza wondering if she was still dreaming. The rain had stopped, but a thick fog covered Thornfield like a ghostly mantle. As she prepared for the day, Eliza tried to convince herself that she was merely anxious about the professional opportunity, not apprehensive. But when, at noon, a second letter arrived, this time delivered by an unknown boy who disappeared into the mist before she could question him, her uneasiness turned into genuine discomfort. The note was brief, written in a different, more delicate handwriting. The Duke is demanding. Previous seamstresses have failed. For your own safety, do not mention the stars. There was no signature, just a small drawing of a crescent moon in the bottom corner of the paper. Eliza sat down slowly, the note trembling slightly between her fingers. Previous seamstresses have failed. What did that mean? And what would be the consequence of failure? She looked again at the gold coins, shining innocently in the faint light filtering through the mist. A fortune, or perhaps a payment for risk. Her eyes fell upon the small miniature portrait of her parents, which she kept near her bed. Her mother, with gentle eyes and a knowing smile, seemed to tell her to trust her instincts. Perhaps I'm being foolish, murmured Eliza, tucking the anonymous note into her diary. But foolish or not, it seems fate is calling me to Ravencrest Manor. Outside the window, the fog continued to thicken, wrapping Thornfield in its mysterious embrace, as if the world itself was preparing for what was to come. Twilight stretched its purple fingers over the hills of Blackmere as Eliza began her journey. The road that wound out of Thornfield gradually became narrower and less maintained as it entered less inhabited territory. Centuries-old trees bent over the path like silent sentinels, their intertwined branches forming a canopy that filtered what remained of the daylight. Eliza had hired the only coachman in the village who was willing to take her to the limits of the duchy's lands, an elderly man named Thaddeus, whose wrinkled face contorted into an expression of concern when she mentioned her destination. "It's not a good place for an honest girl after nightfall," he murmured, helping her into the worn carriage. "They say the crows of Blackmere are the Duke's very own eyes." Eliza clutched her sewing tools case and a small bag containing some spare clothes against her chest. The anonymous warning she had received remained folded inside the pocket of her dress, an invisible weight pressing against her heart. "Have you ever been to Ravencrest Manor, Mr. Thaddeus?" she asked as the carriage began to move, trying to keep her voice casual despite the growing apprehension within her. The old coachman clicked his tongue, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "To the gates, never beyond. The old Duke, father of this current one, was a regular customer at my brother I.S. tavern. He paid well, but he had a look that froze the soul. He made the sign of the cross. After the first Duchess died, he was never the same again. And the son..." Thaddeus let the sentence die in the air. "The current Duke?" Eliza insisted, unable to contain her curiosity. "Sebastian Voss. They say he's the spitting image of his father in appearance, but with his mother's temperament, the foreigner." The coachman lowered his voice, as if the trees themselves might be listening. A woman from distant lands, with knowledge that didn't belong to this world. The marriage lasted only a year before she fell ill. He made air quotes with his wrinkled fingers, but the wagging tongue says she discovered something about her husband, something terrible. The carriage jolted as it passed over a stone, forcing Eliza to grab onto the seat. Thaddeus's stories, though likely exaggerated by years of village gossip, did nothing to calm her nerves. The landscape was changing drastically now. What had once been cultivated fields and occasional groves gave way to a dense forest where the oaks seemed older and more twisted, their knotted trunks suggesting grotesque faces in the growing twilight. The air grew colder and damper, carrying the smell of wet earth and something else, a metallic scent that faintly resembled blood. "I don't like this," Thaddeus muttered as the first mist began to form around the carriage wheels. Blackmere's mist. They say it confuses travelers, leads them down paths that don't exist in daylight. As if confirming his words, a squawking crow cut through the air above them, its form a black silhouette against the rapidly darkening sky. "We're close now," said the coachman. "5 more minutes and we'll reach the gates." Eliza felt her throat tighten. Part of her wanted to order Thaddeus to turn back, to take her back to the safety of her little house in Thornfield. But the gold coins hidden in her purse and the promise of more, enough money to settle her debts and perhaps even expand her business, silenced her doubts. "Ah, there it is," announced Thaddeus, his voice a mixture of reverence and fear. The gates of Ravencrest Manor appeared ahead, 2 imposing wrought iron structures rising at least 4 meters high. Atop each gate, a metal raven with spread wings seemed ready to take flight. The design was so realistic that Eliza almost expected to see the creatures move at any moment. Beyond the gates, a long avenue flanked by cypress trees led up to a mansion that seemed to have been carved out of the mountain itself. Ravencrest Manor was even more imposing than the stories suggested. A gothic monstrosity of dark stone and tall, narrow windows, some illuminated by a yellowish glow, others black as holes in the fabric of reality. Pointed towers rose against the night sky, and gargoyles loomed at the corners of the roof, their twisted expressions frozen in malicious grins. The carriage stopped at a respectful distance from the gates. Thaddeus turned to her, his pleading eyes visible in the darkness. "Miss Reed, it's not too late to change your mind. Whatever they're paying, it's not worth—" "It's fine, Mr. Thaddeus," Eliza interrupted gently, though her own voice betrayed a slight tremor. "Thank you for bringing me here." Gathering her courage, she stepped down from the carriage, carrying her tools case and bag. The air was colder here, as if winter had arrived prematurely to the domains of Blackmere. "I'll remember you in my prayers tonight," Thaddeus murmured, handing her the receipt she had requested, both a commercial formality and proof that someone knew where she had gone. "I'll return to Thornfield in a few days," Eliza said, with more confidence than she felt. "Until then, Mr. Thaddeus." The coachman nodded solemnly before turning the carriage around, the sound of the horses' hooves echoing on the dirt road as they moved away. Eliza watched until the carriage disappeared into the mist, leaving her alone before the intimidating gates. Consulting the pocket watch she had inherited from her father, one of the few valuable items she owned besides her sewing tools, Eliza noted that it was exactly 7 o'clock, right on time, as instructed. Taking a deep breath, she approached the small side gate mentioned in the Duke's letter. As she drew closer, she noticed a figure emerging from the shadows on the other side. A tall, thin woman dressed entirely in black, her severe grey hair pulled back tightly into a bun that accentuated the hard lines of her face. "Miss Reed, I presume," said the woman, her voice as cold as the metal of the gates. "Yes, ma'am. I was summoned by the Duke of Blackmere." The woman, who could only be Mrs. Winters mentioned in the letter, observed her for a few moments with eyes that seemed to assess her value as if evaluating a piece of furniture. Then, with a sharp movement, she unlocked the gate with an ancient-looking key hanging from a chain at her waist. "I am Mrs. Winters, housekeeper of Ravencrest Manor. You're 5 minutes late." Eliza checked her watch again, confirming that it was exactly 7 o'clock. She decided not to argue. "Follow me. Don't touch anything. Don't speak to anyone," instructed the housekeeper, spinning on her heels and starting to walk down the avenue without checking if Eliza followed. The path to the mansion seemed longer than it appeared. Or perhaps it was just the sense of unreality that overwhelmed Eliza as she walked through the thickening mist, the cypress trees on either side of the path seeming to watch her with silent disapproval. The only sound was the rustling of her skirts and the occasional croaking of unseen crows in the trees. "The Duke is very specific about his requirements," said Mrs. Winters without looking back. "Nothing less than perfection is expected." "I understand," Eliza replied. "May I ask about the exact nature of the work I'll be required to do?" "The Duke will explain personally." They finally reached the enormous double doors of the main entrance, each carved with scenes that Eliza couldn't fully discern in the darkness, but which seemed to depict ancient hunts, predators chasing prey through stylized forests. Mrs. Winters, however, ignored the main entrance and led her along a side path to a smaller door, clearly intended for servants. They entered a narrow corridor lit by gas lamps that cast trembling shadows on the stone walls. The interior of Ravencrest was like a living museum of aristocratic past. Elaborate tapestries, crystal chandeliers, dark wood furniture carved with animal and foliage motifs. And portraits, dozens of them, lined the walls of the main corridor they were now passing through, all apparently members of the Voss family across the centuries. Eliza couldn't help but notice that they all shared striking features: the same black hair, proud posture, and most notably, the same penetrating emerald green eyes that seemed to follow her movements as she passed. "The Duke's ancestors," commented Mrs. Winters when she noticed Eliza's gaze on the portraits. 15 generations of Voss have ruled these lands since the first Duke received the title from the crown. Eliza noticed something curious. Although there were many men in the portraits, there were few women, and those depicted had an ethereal quality to their expressions, as if they didn't fully belong to this world. As they turned into another, even more ornate corridor, Eliza glimpsed through a slightly open door something that caught her attention: a shiny object resting on a black velvet cushion. Curious, she slowed her pace, trying to get a better look. It was an extraordinary pair of scissors. Their polished silver blades reflected the flickering candlelight, and their handles were adorned with ruby details that gleamed like drops of crystallized blood. The scissors looked simultaneously beautiful and terrifyingly sharp, with tips that seemed capable of piercing more than just fabric. And then, Eliza noticed, there was indeed something that looked disturbingly like dried blood on one of the blades. Before she could observe further, Mrs. Winters noticed her interest and abruptly closed the door. "Curiosity is an unattractive trait, Miss Reed," the housekeeper reprimanded, her eyes narrowing. "Here at Ravencrest, it's also potentially dangerous." Eliza felt a shiver run down her spine. "I apologize, Mrs. Winters. The Duke values discretion above all else," continued the housekeeper as they resumed their walk. "There are places in this house where servants have disappeared simply for being where they shouldn't be." The casual way the woman mentioned people disappearing made Eliza question, not for the first time, whether she had made a mistake in accepting the Duke's invitation. But now she was inside the mansion, surrounded by Blackmere's mist, and the only way forward seemed to be onward. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity navigating the labyrinth of corridors and passageways, Mrs. Winters stopped in front of what appeared to be a common wall in the main library, an impressive room with shelves reaching from floor to ceiling, filled with ancient volumes bound in leather. The housekeeper pressed a specific sequence of decorative carvings on the wooden panel, and to Eliza's astonishment, the wall slid silently aside, revealing a secret chamber. "Your quarters and workshop," announced Mrs. Winters, gesturing for Eliza to enter. The chamber was surprisingly spacious and well lit by strategically placed candelabras. There was a four-poster bed in one corner, a small sitting area with velvet armchairs, a copper bathtub behind a decorated screen, and in the center of the room, Eliza held her breath. In the center of the chamber, illuminated as if it were a sacred object, stood the most extraordinary wedding dress she had ever seen. Positioned on a life-sized mannequin, the dress seemed almost alive under the flickering candlelight, its ivory silk capturing and reflecting the light with an otherworldly pearlescent glow. The bodice was structured with whalebone and adorned with tiny pearls, arranged in patterns resembling constellations. The light sleeves extended to the elbows before bursting into cascades of Brussels lace, so delicate it seemed like crystallized spiderweb. The wide skirt was composed of layers of silk and tulle that seemed to float like mist, and at the hem, intricate silver thread embroidery formed a pattern that Eliza couldn't fully identify at first glance, but that seemed vaguely familiar. It was a dress worthy of a queen or a goddess. And yet, as she approached, Eliza felt something strange emanating from the dress, a feeling she couldn't name, as if the fabric itself held a secret. "It's magnificent," she murmured, unable to contain her professional awe despite her apprehensions. "It's incomplete," corrected Mrs. Winters. "The Duke requires specific alterations." The housekeeper handed Eliza a sealed parchment bearing the same raven crest she'd seen on the original invitation. "You have 3 nights to complete the work," continued Mrs. Winters. "You'll remain in this room. Your meals will be brought to you. You must not leave under any circumstances after sunset." Eliza frowned. "I can't leave this room?" "Not after nightfall. During the day you may use the adjacent library, but nothing beyond. This wing of the castle is off limits to everyone except me and the Duke." The housekeeper moved toward the exit. "The Duke will come to inspect your progress tomorrow afternoon. I suggest you start immediately." "And the bride?" Eliza asked. "Won't I need measurements, adjustments to ensure it fits her perfectly?" Something peculiar passed over Mrs. Winters' face, an expression that could be interpreted as sadness or perhaps fear. "The measurements have already been taken with precision. The bride will fit the dress perfectly." With those enigmatic words, the housekeeper left the chamber. The wall slid back into place with a soft click, leaving Eliza alone with the wedding dress that under the flickering candlelight seemed to watch her with silent expectation. With slightly trembling fingers, Eliza broke the seal of the parchment and unfolded it. The instructions were written in an elegant, angular handwriting. "Embroider the crescent moon symbol on the sleeves. On the bodice, an owl in flight. On the hem, 7 stars in the formation of Ursa Minor. Use only the silver threads provided in the ebony box." Eliza easily found the mentioned box, a beautiful object of polished black wood with silver hinges, placed on a work table equipped with every tool a seamstress could desire. Upon opening the box, she found spools of silver thread that seemed to glow with their own light, almost like solidified liquid mercury in thread form. She had never seen material like it, and her professional curiosity momentarily overcame her discomfort. However, at the bottom of the parchment, there was an additional note written in a different, hurried and less regular handwriting. "Your life depends on the precision of your work." Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. She looked again at the wedding dress, its ethereal beauty now tinged with an indefinable aura of threat. What exactly had she agreed to do? And more importantly, for whom exactly was she creating this dress? Outside the secret chamber, the wind began to howl through the towers of Ravencrest Manor, and somewhere nearby, a crow cawed in the darkness, as if laughing at a secret only it knew. After traversing numerous hallways, so many that Eliza no longer knew how to return alone to the entrance path, Mrs. Winters stopped in front of an imposing bookcase in the main library. The room was vast, with shelves extending from floor to ceiling, housing ancient tomes bound in leather, some appearing centuries old. The only illumination came from a candle chandelier suspended at the center, casting dancing shadows into the corners of the room. "Observe carefully, Miss Reed, for I will not repeat this path," instructed the housekeeper, her voice cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. With a fluid motion, Mrs. Winters extended her hand toward a specific volume, a dark red tome, almost indistinguishable among the others. She didn't remove it completely, just pulled it slightly forward. A soft mechanical click echoed through the library, followed by the sound of stone sliding over stone. To Eliza's astonishment, the entire bookcase moved to the side, revealing a secret passage. "This way!" commanded Mrs. Winters, lighting a candle on a handheld candelabra and entering the hidden corridor. Eliza hesitated for a moment, her intuition warning her of danger. However, the promise of gold coins and persistent curiosity overcame her fear. Taking a deep breath, she followed the housekeeper into the passageway. The corridor was narrow and cold, with bare stone walls where moisture condensed into small droplets. They descended a spiral staircase for several flights, the air becoming progressively heavier with each step. When Eliza was about to ask how far down they would go, the staircase abruptly ended at a landing leading to a carved oak door adorned with symbols she didn't dare to recognize. Interconnected circles, crescent moons, and strange characters that didn't belong to any known alphabet. Mrs. Winters took an ornate key from her pocket, inserting it into the lock. The door opened with a prolonged groan, as if protesting against the intrusion. "Enter," commanded the housekeeper, raising the candelabrum to illuminate what lay beyond. Eliza crossed the threshold and immediately felt the air change. No longer cold and damp, but warm and scented with essences she couldn't identify. Perhaps sandalwood, mixed with something deeper and more disturbing. The secret chamber completely surprised her. Unlike the austere corridor, the space was opulent, lined with dark red velvet fabrics. Silver candelabras, strategically positioned around the room, emitted a soft golden light, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere. There were no windows, only a small circular opening in the ceiling through which Eliza could glimpse the night sky. But all these details became irrelevant when her eyes landed on the object at the center of the chamber. There, elevated on a pedestal covered with black velvet, stood the most extraordinary wedding dress Eliza had ever contemplated in her entire life. The piece seemed to capture and reflect every particle of light, emitting its own ethereal glow. Made from the purest quality ivory silk, the dress featured a silhouette that simultaneously respected and challenged current fashion conventions. Delicately marked waist, long sleeves fitting tightly to the wrists, voluminous skirt that would certainly flare out into a majestic train. The bodice and hem were adorned with thousands of tiny pearls, each perfectly positioned to form patterns that, at first glance, seemed merely decorative, but upon closer inspection, revealed sequences and shapes that provoked a strange unease. Silver threads intertwined through the fabric like luminous veins, creating hypnotic reflections under the flickering candlelight. Eliza approached slowly, as if drawn by a magnetic force. She extended her fingers, hesitant, until almost touching the precious fabric. "Do not touch without the proper gloves." Mrs. Winters' voice cut through the enchantment, causing Eliza to recoil, startled. "The natural oil from your hands could compromise the silk." It's the most extraordinary piece I've ever seen," murmured Eliza, unable to tear her gaze away. Is it for the Duke's bride? An enigmatic smile formed on the housekeeper's thin lips. One might say so. There was something deeply unsettling about that smile, but what really troubled Eliza was the strange familiarity she felt while observing the dress. It was as if she had seen it before, not in reality, but perhaps in some forgotten dream upon waking, or maybe in feverish visions during her sickly childhood. "The Duke demands specific alterations," explained Mrs. Winters, interrupting Eliza's thoughts. From an inner pocket of her austere attire, she withdrew a parchment sealed with red wax, where an emblem of a raven in flight was imprinted. "All the instructions are here. You have exactly 3 nights to complete the work." Eliza received the parchment with both hands, feeling the weight of the exceptionally high-quality paper. "This will be your work chamber," continued the housekeeper, indicating a side door that Eliza hadn't noticed before. In addition to the dress, it contains a bed, a work table, and all necessary tools. Your meals will be brought at regular intervals. There is a small adjacent room with facilities for your personal hygiene. Eliza hesitated before asking, "How long will I stay here?" "As I mentioned, 3 nights will suffice for someone with your skills," replied Mrs. Winters with calculated coldness. "Final payment will be delivered once the work is satisfactorily completed." The housekeeper moved towards the main door, her skirts rustling against the polished stone floor. On the threshold, she turned one last time, her face partially obscured in shadows. "A final warning, Miss Reed," she said, her tone now more severe than ever. "Under no circumstances should you leave this chamber after sunset. The house has nocturnal peculiarities that could disorient you. For your own safety, remain here until dawn." Before Eliza could formulate any additional questions, Mrs. Winters exited, closing the heavy door behind her. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed through the chamber, an unmistakable reminder that from that moment on, Eliza was effectively imprisoned in Ravencrest Manor. For several minutes, the young seamstress remained motionless, processing her situation. The rational part of her mind screamed that she should feel terrified, that she had made a terrible mistake in accepting this mysterious job. However, an irresistible curiosity overshadowed the fear, fueled by the sight of the supernatural dress and the promise of gold coins that could completely transform her modest life. Finally, with slightly trembling fingers, Eliza broke the seal of the parchment. The paper unfurled with a soft rustle, revealing an elegant and precise handwriting. "Embroider the crescent moon symbol on the sleeves, on the bodice an owl in flight. At the hem, 7 stars in Ursa Minor formation. Use only the silver threads provided in the ebony box." The described symbols were relatively simple, but the precision with which they should be positioned, according to the diagrams included in the parchment, was absolutely rigorous. Small markings indicated exact measurements, specific angles, and even the direction and length of each stitch. Turning the page, Eliza discovered an addition to the instructions, written in a completely different handwriting, more fluid, almost feverish in its urgency. "Your life depends on the precision of your work." A shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't a veiled threat, but a direct statement that left no room for alternative interpretations. For the first time since her arrival, the true danger of her situation manifested in all its crystalline clarity. Drawn by a silvery glint, Eliza noticed on the work table a small, black ebony box, carved with the same strange symbols as the chamber door. Hesitant, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in red velvet, lay skeins of silver thread that appeared almost liquid under the candlelight, too bright, too fluid to be common material. Taking a deep breath to calm her nerves, Eliza decided to examine her temporary quarters. The side door, fortunately unlocked, led to a modest but comfortable bedroom. A narrow bed covered with fine linen sheets occupied one corner, while a mahogany desk with an upholstered chair occupied another. A small, already lit fireplace provided pleasant warmth. Through a heavy curtain, she found the hygiene room, equipped with a copper bathtub and other necessary items. Back in the main chamber, Eliza approached the dress again, this time with the analytical eye of a professional. She needed to carefully examine the piece before starting any alterations. She located a pair of fine white cotton gloves on the work table and, after putting them on, finally touched the marvelous fabric. The sensation was disconcerting. The silk seemed to vibrate subtly under her fingers, as if it possessed a life of its own. Most disturbing, however, was the sudden and overwhelming wave of déjà vu that hit her upon contact. Fragmented visions flooded her mind. A ceremony under moonlight, 7 women with indistinct faces wearing that same dress, a tall man with emerald green eyes watching her with predatory intensity. Eliza recoiled abruptly, nearly stumbling. The visions faded as quickly as they appeared, leaving her breathless and confused. Was it merely her imagination heightened by the strange circumstances? Or was there something more sinister related to that dress, that house, that mysterious invitation? As she sought to regain her composure, her eyes fell upon the instruction parchment, particularly on the last handwritten line, "Your life depends on the precision of your work." With renewed determination, Eliza organized her tools on the table. Whatever the mystery involving the Duke of Blackmere and that extraordinary dress, she would unravel it. In the meantime, she would work with the precision and skill that secretly made her famous among Thornfield's aristocracy. Taking her silver thimble and a fine needle, Eliza prepared to begin the first alteration, the crescent moon symbol on the sleeves. By the time the first morning light began filtering through the circular opening in the ceiling, she would already have a plan to escape that Gothic mansion and its dark secrets. What she didn't know was that the walls of Ravencrest Manor held more than just secrets. They held trapped souls that had been waiting for years or perhaps centuries for someone capable of freeing them. The silence in the secret chamber was absolute, so profound that Eliza could hear the subtle crackling of the candle flames and her own restless breathing. The only company was the wedding dress on the mannequin, which seemed to come alive under the flickering light, as if gently breathing. After examining the instructions for a few minutes, Eliza decided she would start with the simplest symbol, the crescent moon on the sleeves. She opened the ebony box again and took out one of the spools of silver thread. The material was unlike anything she had ever seen before. It seemed both liquid and solid at the same time, capturing and reflecting the candlelight with an almost hypnotic quality. "What kind of thread is this?" she murmured to herself, unrolling a small length to test it between her fingers. The thread was surprisingly strong, and even more curiously, felt slightly warm to the touch, as if it possessed its own heat. When Eliza stretched it against the light, she noticed microscopic patterns within the fiber itself, tiny symbols woven in that appeared and disappeared as the angle changed. With a determined sigh, she threaded her finest needle and approached the first sleeve of the dress. Upon touching the fabric for the first time, a slight electric current seemed to run through her fingers, startling her. "Static," she said aloud, trying to convince herself. "Just static from the fabric." Focusing on the task, she began to trace the outline of the crescent moon. Her fingers moved with the precision acquired through years of practice, each stitch perfectly spaced and uniform. As she worked, a strange sensation began to grow, as if the dress were responding to her touch, absorbing the silver thread not just physically, but somehow feeding on it. Hours passed without Eliza noticing, absorbed in her work. The first crescent moon was almost complete when a subtle noise interrupted her concentration, a sound so low that she initially thought it was just her imagination. "Careful," Eliza froze, the needle suspended in the air. Who's there? Silence. Only the crackling of the candles. Danger. This time, she was certain. A voice, no, several voices, overlapping and almost inaudible, emanated from the very walls of the chamber. Female voices, whispering in unison. Slowly, she placed the needle and thread on the work table and stood up. Is someone there? Please, show yourself. Symbols. Prison. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Eliza cautiously approached the nearest wall, pressing her ear against the cold stone surface. The whispers immediately ceased. Breathing deeply to calm her nerves, she returned to the dress. I'm hearing things, she murmured. The fatigue from the journey and this strange place are affecting my imagination. Resuming her embroidery, she was determined to ignore any other inexplicable sounds. After completing the first crescent moon, she moved on to the second sleeve. With each stitch, however, she began to notice something strange about the silver thread under certain angles of light. The polished metal seemed to briefly change color, taking on a reddish hue, almost like liquid blood, before returning to its normal silvery shine. Fascinating, she murmured, tilting the sleeve to see the effect again. It must be some kind of special paint in the thread's composition. After finishing the crescent moons on both sleeves, Eliza decided to take a break. Her eyes ached from the effort of detailed work under candlelight. Consulting her small pocket watch, she was surprised to discover it was already past midnight. A soft knock on the secret door startled her. The wall slid smoothly open, revealing a young boy no older than 16, thin and pale, carrying a tray with food. His brown eyes darted nervously around the room, avoiding looking directly at Eliza or the dress. "Your meal, miss," he said softly, quickly entering the chamber and placing the tray on a small side table. "Thank you," replied Eliza, grateful for the interruption and the presence of another human being. "What's your name?" "Edwin, miss. I'm a kitchen helper." His eyes finally met hers for a brief moment, and Eliza saw something in them. Fear mixed with what seemed like a warning. "This dress is extraordinary," she commented casually, testing him. "Have you seen others like this being made here before?" Edwin glanced quickly at the dress and then at the door, as if afraid someone might be listening. When he spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. "Be careful with the symbols," he said quickly. "The last girl." The sound of footsteps in the corridor made Edwin abruptly stop. Panicked, he awkwardly bowed and retreated toward the door. "I'll return for the tray in the morning, miss," he said in a normal voice before escaping through the opening. The wall slid again, sealing the chamber. Eliza remained motionless, her heart racing. "The last girl..." "What?" she murmured into the silence. With diminished appetite after the disturbing encounter, she still forced herself to eat something from the brought meal. A creamy mushroom soup, fresh bread, and a small glass of red wine. As she ate, her eyes kept returning to the dress and the symbols she had just embroidered. What did they mean? Why were they so important that her life depended on the precision with which she executed them? And most importantly, what had happened to the last girl, mentioned by Edwin? After finishing her meal, she felt the weight of the day's exhaustion. She decided to rest a few hours before continuing with the next symbol, the owl on the bodice, which would be considerably more complex than the crescent moons. The four-poster bed, though elegant, felt cold and unwelcoming. Eliza rummaged through the sheets, checking them without knowing exactly what she was looking for, before finally lying down, still dressed, only removing her shoes. As she sank into the pillows, something rigid pressed against the back of her neck. Confused, she slid her hand underneath and found a small, folded piece of paper that had been hidden under the pillow. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper in the candlelight. The message was brief, written in hurried feminine handwriting. The bride never reaches the altar. Eliza felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She reread the message several times, trying to decipher its meaning. Was it a warning? A threat? And who had left it there? She looked again at the dress in the center of the chamber. In the dim light of the nearly extinguished candles, the white fabric now seemed tinged with unsettling shadows, and the crescent moons she had embroidered appeared to absorb the little remaining light, creating small areas of deeper darkness. Despite her fatigue, sleep took a while to come. When she finally fell asleep, her dreams were populated by faceless brides walking through endless corridors, their skirts trailing along the stone floor while they whispered words she couldn't understand. At some point in the early morning, she woke up startled with the clear feeling of being watched. The chamber was dark, the candles long since extinguished. Only the faint glow of moonlight entered through a narrow, high window that Eliza hadn't noticed before. And in that silvery light, for a brief moment, she could have sworn she saw the wedding dress move slightly, as if breathing. Forcing herself to close her eyes, she repeated to herself that it was just the wind, just shadows and her exhausted imagination. Eventually, she fell asleep again, but her sleep remained restless. Morning came with a sunbeam penetrating through the narrow window, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. Eliza awoke, feeling still tired, but determined to continue her work. She had only 2 more days and nights to complete the complex alterations demanded by the Duke. Edwin returned, as promised, to collect the previous night's tray and bring breakfast of fresh bread, honey-preserved fruits, and tea. The young servant seemed even more nervous in the daylight, his eyes constantly moving to the door while serving the tea with trembling hands. "Edwin," said Eliza in a low voice, "please, what were you trying to tell me last night? What happened to the last girl?" The young servant turned even paler, if that was possible. "I shouldn't talk about it," he murmured. "But—" He hesitated, then leaned in a little closer. "6 seamstresses before you, miss. 6, all hired to work on this same dress. None were seen leaving Ravencrest." Eliza felt her blood run cold. What happened to them? No one knows for sure. Mrs. Winters says they were dismissed in the middle of the night after completing their work, but Thomas, the stable boy, swears no carriage was requested to take them away. And the symbols? His voice dropped to almost a whisper. The symbols kept being wrong, the Duke said. Never perfect enough. A distant woman's scream echoed somewhere in the mansion, making them both jump. Edwin turned even paler. "I need to go," he said hurriedly, collecting the previous night's tray. "Please, miss, be careful." After Edwin's departure, Eliza turned her attention back to the dress with renewed apprehension. 6 seamstresses before her. 6 women who apparently had disappeared after attempting to complete the same work that was now in her hands. With redoubled determination, she carefully examined the dress, searching for any sign of her predecessor's work. At first, she saw nothing. The fabric seemed immaculate, as if it had never been touched before. But upon closer inspection, with a seamstress's trained eye, she began to notice almost imperceptible marks where stitches had been meticulously removed, small holes that had been skillfully disguised, but which couldn't escape her experienced observation. "Previous attempts," she murmured, "removed as if they never existed." With a shiver, she realized the meaning of the anonymous note. The bride never reaches the altar. It wasn't a warning about the bride. It was a warning about the seamstresses. None of them had completed the work satisfactorily, and none of them had been seen again. Breathing deeply to calm her nerves, Eliza decided to proceed with the work. Escaping now would be impossible. The mansion was a labyrinth, and she had no idea how to find the exit without help. Her only hope was to complete the work with such perfection that the Duke would be satisfied enough to allow her departure. She then focused on the second symbol, the flying owl on the bodice. This was a much greater challenge than the crescent moons, requiring refined technique to capture the essence of a bird in motion, using only thread and needle. As she worked, she began to notice something strange about the behavior of the silver thread. As she embroidered the owl's spread wings, the thread seemed to move almost of its own will, as if eager to form the pattern. Several times, Eliza had the distinct impression that she wasn't guiding the needle, but merely following its natural movement. "Impossible," she murmured, momentarily stepping away from the work to rub her tired eyes. That's when the whispers started again, more distinct this time. "She perceives, the dress absorbs, trapped like us." Eliza abruptly stood up, determined to locate the source of the whispers. This time, she could discern that they were coming stronger from a specific section of the wall to her left. She cautiously approached, pressing her ear against the cold stone. "Hear us, seamstress." "Who are you?" asked Eliza in a low voice, feeling both foolish and terrified at the same time. "Trapped. All of us trapped." The voices sounded almost like wind passing through a crack, but with an unsettlingly human quality. Various female voices speaking not exactly in unison, but in a disconcerting overlap. "The symbols keep us here. Each stitch a chain. The dress is a prison." Eliza stepped back from the wall, her heart pounding against her chest. The implications of what she was hearing were too terrible to contemplate. If the voices were real, and not a product of her overwhelmed imagination, then the women who had disappeared hadn't simply left or been killed. Somehow they were trapped within the very walls of Ravencrest Manor. "How can I help you?" whispered Eliza, unsure if she really wanted an answer. The whispers intensified momentarily, various voices speaking at once in an incomprehensible frenzy before resolving into a single, clearer voice. "Change the symbols. Reverse the pattern." Before Eliza could ask more, a sudden gust of cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing half of the candles. The partial darkness made the silver embroidery on the dress seem to glow with its own light. The crescents and the partial outline of the owl emitting a subtle bluish glow that was both beautiful and profoundly disturbing. The sound of the secret door sliding open made Eliza turn quickly. Mrs. Winters entered the chamber, her critical gaze assessing both Eliza and the progress on the dress. "The Duke will inspect your work this afternoon," announced the housekeeper. "I suggest you quicken your pace if you wish to complete the alterations within the established time frame." Her cold eyes scanned the room, as if searching for something out of place. For a moment, her gaze lingered on the wall from which the whispers had emanated, and a strange expression, almost sadness, briefly crossed her face before being replaced by her usual, impassive mask. "Any issues with the quarters, Miss Reed?" she asked, her voice sharp as a knife. "No, Mrs. Winters," replied Eliza, keeping her voice steady with effort. "Just familiarizing myself with the space." The housekeeper nodded stiffly. "Remember the instructions. Absolute precision is required in the symbols." She hesitated briefly before adding, with what almost seemed a touch of compassion, "For your own good." With these enigmatic words, Mrs. Winters withdrew, the secret door sliding shut behind her with a soft click that sounded strangely final. Eliza remained motionless for a few moments, her mind processing everything she had discovered. Then, with renewed determination, she returned to the dress. If what the whispers said was true, if the symbols really were part of some kind of trap or prison, then she needed to understand exactly what she was embroidering before the Duke arrived. As she resumed work on the owl, she examined every detail of the design with new eyes. not just as a craftsman seeking aesthetic perfection, but as someone trying to decipher a hidden code that could mean her own survival. The world outside continued its course, the midday sun now shining through the narrow high window, but inside the secret chamber of Ravencrest Manor, Eliza Reed felt increasingly trapped in an invisible web of ancestral secrets and imminent danger. With only her needle and wit as weapons to escape the fate that apparently had consumed 6 women before her. The second night at Ravencrest Manor descended with an unnatural swiftness, as if darkness itself was eager to claim the ancient estate. Eliza had spent the day working on the owl embroidery for the bodice, her fingers moving with practiced precision despite her growing unease. The silver threads continued their disturbing transformation beneath her fingers, glinting silver one moment, blood red the next. But she forced herself to continue, mindful of the warning note hidden beneath her pillow. As dusk painted the sky in hues of bruised purple, Eliza's thoughts turned to Edwin and his interrupted warning. What had happened to the last girl? The whispers in the walls had fallen silent during daylight hours, but she knew they would return with the night. Instead of dreading them, she now hoped they might provide answers to the questions multiplying in her mind. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor signaled Edwin's arrival with her evening meal. Eliza quickly formulated a plan. She needed information, and the nervous young servant seemed to be her only potential ally in this house of secrets. When the soft knock came, Eliza called out a welcoming response and returned to her needlework, feigning deep concentration. Edwin entered, bearing a tray laden with a bowl of stew, bread, and a small decanter of wine. "Your dinner, Miss Reed," he announced, his voice slightly steadier than the previous night. "Thank you, Edwin," Eliza replied without looking up from her work, maintaining the pretense of absorption in her task. She sensed the young man hesitating, perhaps wanting to say more, but constrained by fear. As he turned to leave, Eliza deliberately pricked her finger with the needle and let out a small cry of pain. "Miss, are you all right?" Edwin asked, concern momentarily overriding his caution. "Just a small prick," Eliza said, sucking the tiny droplet of blood from her finger. "The light grows poor at this hour. Would you mind lighting the additional candles before you go?" Edwin obliged, moving around the room to light the wall sconces. As he worked, Eliza spoke in a casual tone. "I've had the strangest dreams since arriving here, Edwin. Voices in the walls, women's voices." The candlestick in Edwin's hand trembled slightly. "Old houses creak, miss. The wind plays tricks." "And do the wind's tricks include leaving notes beneath one's pillow? Warning notes about brides never reaching the altar?" Eliza pressed, watching him carefully. Edwin went very still, his already pale face losing what little color remained. "I should go, miss. Mrs. Winters will be expecting me in the kitchen." "She'll come looking for you if you're delayed too long," Eliza agreed. "What a shame. I was hoping to finish this embroidery tonight, but I'm so exhausted I can barely keep my eyes open. I shall have to retire early." The servant gave her a puzzled look, but simply nodded. "Sleep well, Miss Reed." As soon as Edwin departed, Eliza sprang into action. She arranged pillows beneath her blankets to create the illusion of a sleeping form, pinned her hair tightly against her head, and donned her darkest shawl. She would have only a few hours at most before her absence might be discovered, if indeed anyone bothered to check on her during the night. Eliza waited until the corridor outside fell silent, counting 100 heartbeats after Edwin's footsteps faded. Then, with a deep breath to steady her nerves, she eased the door open and slipped into the shadowy passageway. Ravencrest Manor at night was an entirely different realm than by day. Moonlight filtered through occasional windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the carpeted floors. The portraits that lined the walls seemed to follow her with their emerald green gazes as she passed. Unlike most grand houses, there were no clocks chiming the hours, creating an unsettling timelessness to the darkness. Eliza moved as silently as possible, staying close to the walls where the floorboards were less likely to creak. She had no clear destination in mind, only the determination to discover more about the secret ritual for which she was unknowingly crafting a central piece. Following the distant sound of voices, she navigated the labyrinthine corridors, occasionally ducking into alcoves when servants passed by with late-night errands. Each passageway looked eerily similar to the last, and Eliza began to fear she might become hopelessly lost in the maze-like manner. Just as she was considering returning to her room, a peculiar sensation washed over her, a pocket of air so cold it seemed to penetrate to her bones. Simultaneously, the whispers returned, more coherent than before. This way, follow, see the truth. Against all rational judgment, Eliza followed the ethereal voices, allowing them to guide her deeper into the west wing of the manor. The further she progressed, the more neglected the surroundings became. Dust-covered furniture, cobwebs in corners, tarnished wall sconces that clearly hadn't been lit in years. The whispers led her to a grand set of double doors, ornately carved with intertwining roses and thorns. Unlike everything else in this forgotten section, the brass handle gleamed as if recently polished. Eliza pressed her ear against the wood and detected voices engaged in intense discussion. With extreme caution, she turned the handle just enough to create a hair's breadth opening, allowing slivers of light and sound to escape. More skilled than the others, a woman's voice stated firmly. Eliza recognized Mrs. Winters's authoritative tone. Her stitches are impeccable, and she follows the pattern precisely. "She had better," replied a deep male voice that sent an involuntary shiver down Eliza's spine. It possessed a resonant quality that seemed to vibrate in the air itself, beautiful yet terrifying in its power. "The alignment of stars is perfect this cycle. We cannot afford another failure. Shall I increase the draft in her evening wine, Your Grace, to ensure she suspects nothing?" Mrs. Winters inquired. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. They had been drugging her food and drink, explaining perhaps the unusual heaviness of her sleep the previous night despite her anxiety. "No," the male voice, undoubtedly belonging to the Duke of Blackmere, replied after a moment's consideration. "Her mind must remain clear for the detailed work. The symbols must be perfect, or the gateway will not open properly." "Gateway?" Eliza's mind reeled at the implication. "She doesn't suspect anything?" the Duke inquired. "Absolutely nothing, Your Grace," Mrs. Winters assured him. Like the others, the mention of others sent a chill through Eliza's blood. How many young women had been brought here before her? What had become of them? "The symbols must be precisely as ordered," the Duke continued, his voice taking on an almost reverent quality. "Everything depends on this." Eliza strained to hear more, but a sudden noise from somewhere behind her, perhaps a servant on late rounds, forced her to retreat. Heart pounding, she slipped away from the door and quickly sought an alternative route back to her chambers. In her haste, she took a wrong turn and found herself in a corridor she hadn't seen before. Moonlight streamed through a series of tall windows, illuminating a gallery of portraits, all young women in wedding attire. Eliza slowed, drawn to the paintings despite her urgency to return undetected. Each portrait depicted a bride in a similar white gown, though the styles varied slightly across different eras. What struck Eliza most powerfully was the sadness in each woman's eyes, a profound melancholy that the artists had captured with disturbing accuracy. Below each portrait, small brass plaques bore names and dates spanning back nearly 2 centuries. The most recent portrait hung slightly apart from the others. The paint appeared fresher, the colors more vibrant. The nameplate read, "Lady Sophia Ellingsworth, 1882, just 3 years prior." Eliza studied the young woman's features with growing horror. Lady Sophia wore the same emerald pendant that Mrs. Winters had shown her yesterday. The very jewel meant to adorn the neckline of the wedding dress Eliza was altering. "They never last long after the ceremony," a soft voice spoke from behind her. Eliza whirled around, a scream rising in her throat that she barely managed to suppress. Standing, no hovering, a few inches above the floor, was a young woman in a nightgown. Her form was translucent, moonlight passing through her as if through smoke, yet her features were perfectly distinct. She appeared to be approximately Eliza's age, with long auburn hair flowing freely down her back. "Lady Sophia," Eliza whispered, her voice barely audible. The spectral figure inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. "You see me. The others couldn't, not until it was too late." Eliza's mind struggled to accept what her eyes were witnessing. You're a ghost. A shade. A memory. An echo," Lady Sophia replied, her voice carrying the quality of distant wind chimes. "Trapped between worlds by his ritual. The Duke's ritual. What does he want? What happened to you?" The questions tumbled from Eliza's lips. The spectral bride drifted closer, her expression sorrowful. "The dress you're altering. It's not just a wedding gown. The symbols form a binding spell, anchoring the bride's soul to Ravencrest even after death." Eliza recalled the Duke's words. "The symbols must be perfect, or the gateway will not open properly." She felt ill. "But why? What purpose does it serve?" Lady Sophia's form flickered like a candle in a draught. "He never loved me. It was only ever about the ritual." Her ghostly hand reached toward the embroidered neckline of her nightgown, where a vicious wound became visible, blood darkening the translucent fabric. "Our life force feeds his unnatural longevity. Each bride gives him 7 more years of youth." The ghost's figure began to fade, her outline blurring. "He will come for you next. The cycle must continue. Unless what?" Eliza pressed, desperate for the spirit to remain long enough to provide answers. "The symbols. They can be..." Lady Sophia's voice grew fainter as her form dissipated. "He never suspected I could read his grimoire. The reverse pattern breaks the..." Before she could complete her revelation, the spectral bride vanished entirely, leaving Eliza alone in the moonlit gallery. From somewhere in the distance, a clock finally chimed midnight, breaking the manor's unnatural silence. Shaken to her core but more determined than ever, Eliza quickly found her way back to her chambers, narrowly avoiding a patrolling Mrs. Winters along the way. Once safely inside her room, she rushed to examine the wedding dress under new scrutiny. What she had previously seen as merely beautiful, intricate embroidery now revealed itself as something far more sinister. The patterns she'd been instructed to create were not decorative but functional, components in an arcane ritual designed to trap another soul within Ravencrest's walls. Examining the gown closely, Eliza noticed something she had overlooked before. The tiny dark spots appearing beneath her completed moon crescent embroidery. It wasn't thread deterioration as she had initially suspected, but something far more horrifying. The fabric itself seemed to be absorbing life, creating tiny vacuums of energy wherever the silver thread made contact. "A soul trap," she whispered to herself, fingers tracing the delicate stitching. "And I'm the next bride." Eliza sat heavily on the edge of her bed, mind racing through possible escape plans. The doors would be locked, the grounds patrolled. Even if she managed to flee, where would she go? Who would believe her fantastic tale of ghostly brides and soul-stealing dukes? As dawn's first light began to filter through the curtains, Eliza made her decision. She wouldn't run. Not yet. Lady Sophia had mentioned a reverse pattern that could break the cycle. If the symbols could bind a soul, perhaps they could also release those already trapped. And if Eliza's suspicion was correct, the Duke's own immortality might be tied to the imprisoned souls of his brides. She returned to the dress, studying each instructed symbol with newfound understanding. The owl in flight symbolized the soul's capture. The 7 stars represented the 7 years of life extracted from each sacrifice. The moon crescent governed the transition between life and death. What would happen if these symbols were subtly altered? If the owl was stitched to appear landing rather than taking flight? If the stars were rearranged into a different constellation? If the crescent moon were inverted? For the first time since arriving at Ravencrest Manor, Eliza felt a glimmer of hope. She was no helpless victim, but a skilled artisan whose expertise might prove to be the Duke's undoing. Each stitch she had made was perfect, precisely as ordered. But moving forward, she would create a masterpiece of subversion. As she prepared for her 3rd and final day of work, Eliza sensed the whispers in the walls growing stronger, as if the trapped brides sensed her intentions and rallied to her cause. She would complete the dress as requested, but with subtle, critical alterations that the Duke, for all his supernatural power, might not notice until it was too late. She only hoped that Lady Sophia would return to provide more guidance before the ritual began. The moon would be full tomorrow night, leaving precious little time to master the art of unmaking a centuries-old curse with nothing but needle and thread. The 3rd night at Ravencrest Manor descended like a shroud, heavy with the weight of approaching destiny. Outside, clouds obscured the stars, as if the heavens themselves were reluctant to witness what might unfold within the ancient estate's walls. Tomorrow night would bring the full moon, and with it the culmination of whatever ritual the Duke had been preparing. Eliza stood before the wedding dress, now nearly complete except for the final symbol, the 7 stars in the formation of Ursa Minor that were to adorn the hem. Her fingers ached from 2 nights of meticulous work, implementing the subtle alterations Lady Sophia's ghost had hinted at, while maintaining an appearance of faithful adherence to the Duke's specifications. The owl no longer appeared to be taking flight, but rather landing. The crescent moon had been inverted just enough to change its magical properties without being immediately noticeable to the untrained eye. But was it enough? Without more information about the ritual itself, Eliza could not be certain her modifications would disrupt the Duke's plans. The whispered guidance from the walls had grown more frantic as the full moon approached, but the voices remained frustratingly cryptic. Find the book. The truth lies within. The lineage reveals all. Eliza made her decision. Tonight, rather than completing the dress, she would seek answers. The modifications to the remaining symbols could wait until she better understood what she was truly facing. Setting aside her needle and silver thread, she prepared for another nocturnal excursion. This time her preparations were more thorough. She had memorized a partial map of the manor's layout from her previous exploration and timed the servants' rounds. Edwin had brought her dinner earlier than usual, mentioning that the household would be occupied with preparations for tomorrow's arrival. Presumably, the Duke would return to the manor for the ceremony. Eliza waited until the grandfather clock in the distant corridor chimed 11 times before easing her door open. The passageway beyond was dark, illuminated only by occasional moonlight filtering through cloud breaks. She moved like a shadow, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet runner, her dark shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The library, that was her destination. If answers existed anywhere in this house of secrets, they would be found among the ancient tomes and family records stored there. Moreover, Eliza had noted something peculiar during her journey with Mrs. Winters to the hidden chamber. The secret passage behind the bookshelf had not been locked. Perhaps, in her arrogance, the housekeeper never imagined her prisoner would dare venture out. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors proved easier than on her previous excursion. The manor seemed to hold its breath, the usual creaks and settling noises conspicuously absent. When Eliza finally reached the library's massive oak doors, she found them mercifully unlocked and unguarded. The vast chamber lay in darkness, save for the pale moonlight streaming through tall windows. Thousands of books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather spines gleaming dully in the silvered light. The air smelled of parchment, leather, and something older, the musty scent of accumulated knowledge and secrets long kept. Eliza closed the door silently behind her and withdrew a small candle stub and matchbox she had concealed in her pocket. With steady hands, she struck a match and lit the candle, keeping the flame partially shielded with her hand to minimize its visibility from outside the room. Where to begin? The library contained what appeared to be centuries of accumulated volumes. Eliza moved methodically along the shelves, scanning titles by candlelight. Most were standard works one might expect in any noble house. Histories, classics of literature, scientific treatises, books of poetry. But Eliza sought something more specific, something that would reveal the dark history of Blackmere and its dukes. After nearly an hour of searching, her persistence was rewarded. In the corner section devoted to genealogy and family histories, she discovered a leather-bound tome, larger than most, its spine emblazoned with faded gold lettering. The Noble Lineages of Blackmere, a complete historical account. With trembling hands, Eliza lifted the massive book from its shelf and carried it to a reading table positioned beneath one of the windows. The moonlight, combined with her candle, provided just enough illumination to read the aging text. The book began conventionally enough, detailing the founding of the Blackmere line in the early 16th century, when King Henry VIII granted the first Duke his title and lands as reward for services to the crown. Generation by generation, the book chronicled the family's rising fortunes, territorial expansions, and political alliances. Eliza skimmed these sections impatiently, seeking information more directly relevant to her situation. It was in the chapter devoted to the fifth Duke, Sebastian Alaric Voss, 1675 to 1742, that the narrative took a darker turn. Unlike his predecessors, who had married into nobility and produced heirs in the traditional manner, Sebastian's entry contained troubling anomalies. Following his return from an expedition to the Orient in 1702, Eliza read, the Duke's character underwent a marked transformation. Previously known for his scholarly pursuits and gentle disposition, he became reclusive and was rumored to engage in alchemical experiments. Most notably, his marriage patterns diverged from family tradition. Eliza leaned closer, the hair on her arms rising as she continued reading. The Duke wedded his first bride, Elisabetta Corvini, a merchant's daughter from Venice, in the winter of 1705 during the full moon. Records indicate the ceremony took place at midnight in the private chapel of Ravencrest. The bride perished of an unspecified illness mere hours after the wedding feast. She was interred in the family crypt without public viewing of the body. His second marriage, to Catherine Wilde of the Yorkshire Wilds in 1712, followed an identical pattern, a midnight ceremony during the full moon, followed by the bride's sudden death. This pattern repeated 5 more times over the decades, with the Duke remaining apparently ageless despite advancing years, a fact noted with suspicion by contemporaries. A chill ran down Eliza's spine as she turned the page, revealing a detailed family tree. The branch representing Sebastian Alaric Voss extended far longer than any other, spanning nearly a century before finally connecting to his heir, a nephew, not a son. More disturbing were the 7 lines extending from Sebastian's name, each connecting to a different bride, each line truncated almost immediately with a death date matching the wedding date. But the true horror revealed itself in the next section titled The Covenant of Shadows. Several pages appeared to have been partially torn out, but enough remained to piece together a horrifying truth. The Duke's expedition to the east brought him into contact with an ancient sect dedicated to the worship of Nyx, whom they called the Lady of Night. According to recovered correspondence, Sebastian entered into a blood pact with this entity, securing unnatural longevity and power in exchange for periodic sacrifices. The ritual required brides of specific lineage, their life force harvested through symbolic patterns incorporated into the wedding ceremony. The remaining paragraphs had been deliberately damaged, portions of the text scratched out with such force that the paper was torn. Yet one sentence remained clearly visible at the bottom of the mutilated page. The 8th sacrifice completes the cycle, granting not merely extended life, but true immortality. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She was to be the 8th bride, the final sacrifice needed to complete the Duke's dark covenant. The symbols she had been instructed to embroider were not decorative but functional components of an elaborate ritual designed to bind her soul and transfer her life force to Sebastian Voss. A loose page slipped from between the book's final leaves as Eliza turned to the end of the chapter. It contained 7 portraits arranged in a circle, miniature watercolor paintings of remarkable detail and artistry. Each depicted a young woman in bridal attire, their faces rendered with careful attention. The blood drained from Eliza's face as she examined each portrait in turn. Though the hairstyles and specific features varied somewhat, all 7 brides shared a haunting similarity. High cheekbones, delicate jawlines, and most strikingly, eyes of an unusual shape that gave them a slightly feline appearance. They were her eyes, her cheekbones, her jawline. With mounting horror, Eliza realized the truth. She had not been chosen randomly. The Duke had been searching for her, or someone who matched a specific physical template. The previous 7 brides all resembled her because they shared some common ancestry, some bloodline the ritual required. Suddenly, her grandmother's cryptic warnings about avoiding Blackmere County made terrible sense. The old woman had always been evasive about their family history, refusing to discuss Eliza's maternal great-grandmother, who had reportedly fled from this very region as a young woman. Had she known? Had she been protecting Eliza from this fate? The sound of a door opening somewhere in the library jolted Eliza from her horrified trance. Quickly she closed the book and extinguished her candle, ducking beneath the reading table as footsteps approached. "I know you're here, Miss Reed." Mrs. Winter's voice cut through the darkness, cold and precise as a surgeon's blade. "Did you think we wouldn't notice your absence from your chambers, that we don't monitor every movement within these walls?" Eliza remained motionless, scarcely daring to breathe, as the housekeeper's footsteps circled the library. "You might as well reveal yourself," Mrs. Winters continued, her tone almost conversational now. "It makes no difference what you've discovered. The ceremony will proceed regardless. His Grace has waited too long to complete the cycle." The footsteps paused, and Eliza could see the hem of Mrs. Winter's black dress just a few feet away from her hiding place. "You should feel honored, Miss Reed. Few women are chosen for such an elevated purpose. Your sacrifice will ensure His Grace's ascension to true immortality. Your essence will live on within him for eternity." A new voice joined the conversation, male, elderly, and trembling with excitement. "Is she here, Mrs. Winters? Has our final bride been secured?" "Indeed, Mr. Thorne. She's merely playing a little game of hide and seek," the housekeeper replied. "She'll be properly prepared for tomorrow night's ceremony, I assure you." "Excellent, excellent," the man Eliza couldn't see responded. "The astronomical alignment is perfect, the most favorable in 3 centuries. The Lady of Night will be most pleased with our offering." Their voices moved toward the library doors, Mrs. Winter's final words floating back to Eliza's hiding place. "Secure all entrances to the east wing. Post additional guards at the perimeter. She must not leave the grounds before moonrise tomorrow." The doors closed, and Eliza remained frozen beneath the table until the sound of footsteps faded completely. Her mind raced with the implications of what she had discovered. She was intended as the final sacrifice in a centuries-old ritual, a bride selected not for love or companionship, but for her blood and life force. Escape now seemed even more imperative, yet increasingly impossible. The manor would be on high alert after discovering her absence from her chamber. Guards would be watching for any attempt to flee the grounds. With trembling hands, Eliza retrieved the book and returned it to its shelf. She couldn't risk being caught with it in her possession, but before replacing it entirely, she carefully removed the loose page containing the portraits of the previous brides, folding it and concealing it within her bodice. She needed this evidence, this connection to the women who had suffered the fate now intended for her. The journey back to her chamber would be perilous, but Eliza had no choice. She had to return and complete her work on the wedding dress, not as the Duke intended, but with her own modifications, informed now by better understanding of the ritual's purpose. As she slipped from the library and back into the shadowy corridor, Eliza felt the weight of 7 pairs of eyes watching her, the previous brides of Blackmere. Their spirits bound to Ravencrest Manor by dark magic, waiting to see if she would share their fate or finally break the cycle that had entrapped them. The whispering in the walls grew louder as she navigated the labyrinthine passages, no longer indistinct murmurs but a chorus of urgent voices. The reverse pattern: invert the stars, break the circle, sever the bond. By the time Eliza reached the hidden chamber containing the wedding dress, she had formulated a plan. She would complete the final symbol, the 7 stars of Ursa Minor, but with a crucial alteration to their arrangement. If the Duke sought to create a magical circuit through which to channel her life force, she would ensure that circuit contained a fatal flaw. The clock in the distant corridor struck 3 as Eliza retrieved her needle and the silver thread that seemed to shift between metallic brightness and blood red in the candlelight. There were only 21 hours remaining before the full moon reached its zenith. 21 hours to perfect her counter-ritual and prepare to face the Duke of Blackmere. As dawn's first light filtered through the small circular opening in the chamber's ceiling, Eliza completed the final stitch. The dress was finished, its symbols in place, subtly critically altered in ways that she prayed would disrupt the Dark Covenant. She had no way to be certain her modifications would work, but the approving whispers from within the walls gave her hope. She folded the page with the 7 portraits and concealed it beneath her mattress, then lay down to rest. She would need all her strength for the confrontation to come. As she drifted into an exhausted sleep, Eliza's dreams were filled with the faces of the 7 brides who had preceded her, no longer looking at her with warning or pity, but with something that resembled hope. Eliza's footsteps echoed like whispers against the cold stone floor as she ascended from the library's secret passage, heart still pounding from the chase. The air was heavy with incense and secrets, the flickering candlelight stretching shadows like claws across the hallway walls. Her hands trembled slightly as Ela reached for the brass doorknob of her chamber. A strange energy tingled in her fingertips, not fear, but the weight of something inevitable. As the door creaked open, she froze. Standing beside the mannequin that held the nearly completed wedding dress was a tall figure cloaked in dark velvet. The man's posture was regal, and even from behind he emanated a presence both alluring and dangerous. His silhouette was etched in the soft amber light, the fire from the hearth dancing along the sharp angles of his frame. The figure turned slowly. Eyes the color of shattered emeralds met hers, piercing and ancient. His features were finely chiseled, as if carved by divine hands, unnaturally symmetrical, hauntingly beautiful. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She had seen this face before, in oil paintings that lined the corridors, yes, but also in her dreams, always watching. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice smooth as silk and cold as the blade of a knife. Or should I say, Eleonora? Her stomach dropped. He stepped closer, and though he moved like a nobleman, there was something predatory in his grace. "You haven't completed the embroidery," he said, gesturing to the gown with an elegant hand. "There's still a star missing, just one." "I discovered what you've done," Eliza said, trying to steady her voice, though fear gnawed at her spine. "The other brides, the ritual, your pact." The Duke's lips curled into a half-smile, more shadow than mirth. "You've uncovered more than the others. That alone is impressive. But you haven't even touched the heart of it. I know about Lady Sophia, about the 7 brides, about the years of life you steal." He let out a soft chuckle, as if amused by a child's understanding of the world. "Oh, Miss Reed, you speak of fragments, half-truths. Let me give you the whole." He took another step toward her, and she felt the temperature in the room shift, colder, like the breath of something long dead. "Your great-grandmother," he began, "was the only one who ever escaped, Eleonora. She was the 7th. He circled her slowly, like a falcon above prey. "She fled before the ceremony was complete, before the bond could be sealed. The ritual demands 8. Eliza turned to face him, jaw clenched. "Why 8? 8 is eternity," he said softly. 7 brides gifted me centuries of youth and power, but without the 8th, the cycle remains incomplete, and so I have waited patiently, watching your bloodline, until you." "No," Eliza whispered. "Yes," he replied. "It had to be you. The same eyes, the same hands, the same soul." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're the mirror of her, which is why it will work this time. The final key turned at last." The fire dimmed, shadows creeping up the walls like silent witnesses. A tremor ran through her body, but she met his gaze. "She cursed you," Eliza said, "didn't she?" A flicker of something, pain, rage, crossed his eyes. "She tried," he murmured. "Her blood cursed this house, made it harder to find you, but nothing truly defies fate, not forever." He gestured to the dress. "This garment isn't merely ceremonial, it is the vessel. The silver thread is woven from the moon's blood, the pearls from the tears of widows, the lace from the bindings of the dead. Every stitch, every rune, every hidden symbol. It's all a conduit for the binding." Eliza shook her head slowly. "I changed them." The Duke raised an eyebrow. "I inverted the crescent. I altered the owl. The stars are out of order. The ritual is broken." For the first time, his smile faltered. "Clever," he said, his voice tightening. "But you misunderstand. You believe you can subvert the magic from the outside, when the ritual depends on you, your breath, your blood, your will." He closed the distance between them. "You see, my dear, the dress is just the stage. You are the offering." Before she could move, his hand rose, and she felt an invisible force clutch her throat. Not enough to strangle, just enough to paralyze. Her limbs froze in place, eyes wide with panic as he studied her. "You cannot run from this," he said, his voice low. "You were marked the moment you entered Ravencrest, the moment you touched the fabric." Tears stung at her eyes, not from pain, but fury. "You're a monster." "No," he whispered, gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I am the consequence." Suddenly a crack of thunder split the sky outside. The windows trembled. The wind howled through the cracks in the ancient walls, and for a moment, Eliza thought she heard a chorus of whispers. Voices of the lost, the betrayed, the dead. "You don't have to do this," she said, summoning the last of her strength. "End it now. Let them go. Let me go." But the Duke turned his back to her, returning to the dress. "You will wear this willingly," he said, "or I will summon the shade of Eleonora herself, and she will make you submit." He snapped his fingers. The mirror across the room clouded over, black mist curling within its frame. A form began to take shape, a figure in a wedding dress, face obscured, arms reaching outward. Eliza felt her knees weaken. "No," she breathed. "Yes," said the Duke, his voice now like iron. And then a scream, not from Eliza nor the Duke, but from the mirror. The spectre within convulsed, its hands clawing at its own reflection. The mist cracked like glass, and through the shattering surface, another face appeared. Lady Sophia. She was glowing. "No more," the spirit said, her voice both ethereal and defiant. "No more stolen years, no more brides." A shockwave burst from the mirror, throwing the Duke across the room. Eliza collapsed to the floor, gasping. The pressure around her vanished. The Duke rose, furious, his perfect features distorted by wrath. "You cannot stop what has been set in motion." "I already have," Eliza said, standing tall. "You lost control the moment you let love die. The ritual runs on sacrifice, but also on submission, and I submit to nothing." The mirror now reflected not just Sophia, but others, the 6 brides. Their faces, once blank, now alive with strength, resolve, and light. Eliza stepped toward the dress and, with shaking hands, pulled the silver scissors from her pocket. "You needed me to finish the gown." She raised the blades. "So I will." And with one clean motion, she cut the final thread. The echo of the Duke's fall had barely faded when Eliza bolted the door behind him. Her chest heaved with ragged breath, her fingers trembling around the silver scissors she had used to sever the final thread. But victory was not yet hers. The gown still lay sprawled on the mannequin like a waiting corpse, beautiful, intricate, and very much alive. She was not safe. Not yet. Ravencrest stirred around her, as if sensing her defiance. The air in the chamber had thickened, humming with unseen tension. The fire in the hearth burned low and blue, casting the room in unnatural hues. Whispers crept from the cracks in the walls, sometimes weeping, sometimes warning. But Eliza had no time to listen, not fully. She turned to the dress. If she could not run, and the guarded grounds, high gates, and watchful spirits made that a certainty, and if she could not fight the Duke by force, there was only one path left. She would outwit the ritual itself. Drawing the heavy velvet curtains closed, Eliza returned to her work table and spread the parchment she had discovered days ago, now stained with ink, wax, and the blood from her pricked fingers. These were the original instructions. The ancient embroidery guide she'd assumed was symbolic, artistic. Now she saw it for what it was. A binding spell, not one of death as she'd first believed, but of eternal captivity. The gown was not meant to kill. It was meant to fuse, to shackle, the bride's soul bound forever to Ravencrest, her life force trickling into the Duke, drop by drop, year after year, while she wandered the halls as a whispering ghost, unseen, unheard. A fate worse than death. The 7 brides were not sacrifices. They were hosts, trapped eternally within the stone and shadow of the estate. Eliza's pulse quickened. Her eyes scanned the parchment again, this time with greater clarity, and she spotted it. The subtle curves of the sigils, the negative space within the stars, the way the owl's wings angled upward, not for flight but for surrender. It was brilliant, cruel, and reversible. She rolled up her sleeves. Taking needle in hand, Eliza began the impossible. The first symbol she altered was the moon, originally a waxing crescent, pointing toward growth, promise, and submission. She reversed the curve, transforming it into a waning crescent, signifying retreat, closure, and resistance. Next, the owl. In the original design, it soared mid-flight, wings outstretched in silent surrender. Eliza pulled the thread, unraveled the sky around it, and restitched the bird in repose, perched still, with one unblinking eye facing the viewer. A watcher now, not prey. Her fingers worked quickly, precisely. Time was against her, but years of training had made her dexterous, even under pressure. Her grandmother's voice echoed faintly in her mind. Bordar e escrever feitiço em silêncio. Now that truth had never felt more literal. She moved to the stars, 7 in total, originally arranged in a heptagram, each point representing a bound soul. But she shifted them, reordering the pattern into a spiral. Not one of containment, but of dispersal, each point facing outward, directing the energy away from the mansion. As the final star was repositioned, a low hum vibrated through the floorboards. The candle flames elongated. The whispers in the walls grew louder, no longer directionless, no longer distant. Some cried out in protest, others in approval. Eliza paused, needle mid-air. "I hear you," she whispered. "I'm trying." The voices pressed in, feminine, fractured, fierce. "Set us free." She nodded and pressed forward. With each stitch, the gown grew warmer, not just in temperature, but in presence. It pulsed beneath her fingers, the silk rippling like breath. The embroidery thread, once mundane, now shimmered with faint light, blue, silver, violet, as though responding to her intent. When she stitched the final symbol, a thorned rose at the gown's hem. A loud crack reverberated through the room. One of the wall mirrors fractured. A gust of wind blew through the fireplace, snuffing out the flame. Darkness swallowed the chamber. And yet, Eliza didn't feel fear. She felt power. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time had unraveled in Ravencrest, as easily as silk between her hands. She lit a lantern, dim and flickering, and stepped back from the gown to examine it in full. It was no longer a vessel of bondage. It was a weapon. The energy radiating from it was no longer suffocating, but sharp, like lightning trapped in lace. A reversed ritual, a counterspell etched in every line. Eliza's work had taken the Duke's masterpiece and turned it against him. But she knew this wouldn't go unnoticed for long. Already, she felt the house stirring, the very stones unsettled. The Duke would return. He had to. The bond he'd spent decades nurturing had been cut and rewoven by a woman he underestimated. That mistake would be his undoing. And yet, she was not immune to fear. Eliza moved to the window and peered into the night. The gates stood firm, the woods beyond thick with fog. Somewhere in the darkness, hounds howled, a low, mournful sound that raised goosebumps on her skin. There would be no running. This would be her battlefield. She turned back to the gown and placed it carefully on the mannequin, now centered beneath the grand canopy of her chamber. The dress seemed to glow faintly in the lantern's light, alive with intent. A chill passed over her. Not just the wind. Someone had entered the room. "Eliza," came the voice, smooth, dark, now laced with fury. The Duke stood in the threshold, eyes alight with emerald flame, cloak billowing behind him as if stirred by an invisible tempest. "I warned you," he said. "I gave you the choice to comply. You've made your decision." Eliza did not flinch. "So have you." He stepped forward, and the ground trembled, but Eliza reached out and touched the dress. The moment her fingers met the silk, the room erupted with energy. A wave of light burst from the embroidery, spilling across the stone, cracking tiles, shattering the remaining mirrors. The Duke recoiled, snarling like an animal. "What have you done?" he hissed. "I rewrote the spell," she said, voice steady now. "The bride doesn't bind to the mansion anymore. The bride commands it." The symbols stitched into the gown glowed brighter, and a new chorus rose, a harmony of women's voices, strong, defiant, and free. The 7 brides were no longer trapped. Their spirits surged into the room, circling the Duke like avenging phantoms. He staggered backward, clawing at the air. "Impossible," he cried. "I crafted the ritual. I chose the fabric, the threads." "But you didn't choose me," Eliza said. "I chose myself." She stepped forward and the dress shimmered in response. "Your time ends tonight." The spirits converged, and the Duke screamed. The full moon rose, swollen and watchful, casting an eerie glow across the stone spires of Ravencrest. Clouds scattered like ashes on the wind, revealing the night in its most haunting form, clear, cold, and inevitable. Eliza stood at the threshold of the grand hall, her breath shallow, her heart steady. She was draped in the altered wedding gown, now pulsing faintly with an internal light, soft blue threads woven into a fabric once designed to imprison, now thrumming with quiet rebellion. Two housemaids stood silently at either side of her, their eyes glazed, faces pale with ceremonial powder. They were not the same women Eliza had encountered during her early days at Ravencrest. These were shells, vessels acting under some older will. They opened the great double doors without a word, and the ritual began. The grand hall had been transformed into a ceremonial chamber, cold and vast. Ancient stones reflected the light of hundreds of black candles that lined the perimeter in a perfect circle. Their flames flickered not with air, but with presence. Something unseen drifting through the space, thickening the air with dread. At the far end, beneath a great arch adorned with dried hemlock and yew, stood the Duke. Sebastian Voss, dressed in midnight regalia, eyes gleaming like obsidian blades. Between them, forming a perfect ring, stood the house's most loyal. Mrs. Winters among them, draped in ceremonial robes, hands clasped before her as if in prayer. The other servants, faces expressionless, eyes sunken yet focused, completed the circle. Eliza stepped forward. The gown shimmered softly with each step, the hem gliding over the marble like mist. She could feel it resisting the pull of the room, its enchantments, its traditions, its hunger. She had reprogrammed its very essence, and now it served only her will. When she reached the center, she turned slowly to face the Duke. "It is done, Your Grace," she said, her voice clear as crystal, echoing off the stone walls. "The embroidery is complete." Sebastian stepped down from the altar, approaching her slowly, ceremoniously. His gloved hands clasped behind his back, his face carved from marble, unreadable. He stopped a breath away and looked at the dress. His eyes scanned every stitch, his trained eye seeking precision, expecting loyalty. At first, he saw what he wanted: the moon, the owl, the stars. The symbols were there, familiar. But then, a pause, the faintest narrowing of the eyes. He leaned closer, his breath caught, and then, recognition. "No," he murmured. Eliza watched as his face shifted, first with confusion, then with dawning comprehension, and finally with pure, unfiltered rage. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like iron. "What did you do?" he hissed, voice low and feral. Eliza didn't pull away. She met his gaze unwavering. "I broke the cycle." At that moment the gown ignited, not in flames, but in light. The embroidery flared with electric blue, each symbol awakening as if summoned by her words. A shockwave pulsed outward from her chest, pushing the Duke back. The black candles sputtered violently, and several snuffed out entirely. A wind rose from nowhere, tearing through the closed chamber with a howl that sounded like a chorus of voices. The servants froze. Mrs. Winters stumbled backward, eyes wide with something approaching fear. The Duke stared at Eliza, aghast. You little witch." "No," Eliza said calmly, the wind tossing her dark curls around her face like a crown. "I'm the legacy of the one woman who defied you, the seventh bride." And then they appeared. Figures stepped from the shadows, not walking, not floating, but emerging, fading into existence like memories suddenly remembered. 7 women. Each wore a version of the same cursed gown, now radiant with liberation. Their faces bore traces of who they once were. The painter, the pianist, the healer, the twin sisters, the nobleman's daughter, and the seventh bride, Eleonora, Eliza's own bloodline. Their eyes were clear now. Their presence filled the room with holy defiance. The Duke staggered back. "No, this isn't possible. You are mine. You were all mine." "You fed on them," Eliza said, voice rising like thunder, "stole their youth, their energy, bound their spirits to this house to extend your miserable existence." "I gave them eternity," he roared. "You caged them," she shot back. "But they're not yours anymore." It was a reclaiming. The Duke fell to his knees as the spirits pressed their palms to his shoulders, his chest, his head. The energy he had stolen was drawn from him, thread by thread, breath by breath. His skin paled, his face aged in seconds, hair turned silver, bones cracked audibly beneath his clothes. "No," he gasped, clutching at Eliza's skirt. "Please, not like this." Eliza looked down at him. "You chose this the moment you cursed your first bride." He let out one final cry, a sound of fury, fear, and something that might have been regret. And then he crumbled. Dust. Ash. Gone. The silence that followed was thick and sacred. One by one, the spirits turned to Eliza. Eleonora reached out, placing a cool hand on her cheek. "You gave us peace," she whispered. Eliza's eyes welled. "I only followed your footsteps." Eleonora smiled. "You walked farther." The seven spirits stepped backward into the circle of the chamber. The air shimmered around them like the surface of water, and then they dissolved into light, rising upward like fireflies returning to the stars. And they were gone. Eliza collapsed to her knees. The gown, now dim and quiet, settled around her like a blanket. The morning came slowly to Ravencrest. For the first time in decades, perhaps centuries, the mansion stood quiet. Not the unnatural stillness that had once crept through its halls like fog, but a true calm. A breath held, then released. Eliza stood alone in the grand hall. Barefoot on the cold marble, the cursed wedding gown lay draped across her arms, no longer glowing, no longer heavy with secrets. It was just fabric now. Thread and lace, buttons and stitches, lifeless, powerless. She folded it carefully and placed it inside a wooden trunk near the hearth, then sealed the lid with a long, deliberate press of her palm. She didn't need to bury it. It was over, at least the worst of it. She turned slowly, scanning the room. The black candles had melted into wax puddles on the floor. The servants, those who had been entranced by the ritual, had vanished into their quarters at first light, awakening from their trance with fragmented memories and glassy eyes. Mrs. Winters had disappeared entirely, leaving behind only a silver locket and the faintest scent of lavender. Perhaps she too had been a prisoner. Perhaps they all had. Eliza wandered the corridors in silence. Rooms she had once feared now felt hollow. The whispering walls no longer murmured secrets, the shadows in the corners no longer watched. She passed the mirror gallery, where once reflected brides had screamed and wept. Now the glass showed only her reflection, tired, human, and free. She paused there for a long time, simply staring at herself. For the first time, she saw not the dressmaker, not the orphan, not the frightened girl thrust into someone else's story. She saw Eliza, and she was enough. Later, she found the small chapel tucked behind the garden wing. Dust coated the pews, and cobwebs veiled the altar like lace. But light streamed through the stained glass windows in golden columns, illuminating the air like a cathedral of forgotten gods. She sat there for a while, hands folded. She didn't pray. She simply listened to her own breath, to the silence that had once been filled with sorrow, and in that silence she heard something new, possibility. That afternoon, she walked the estate grounds. The gardens were wild but not lifeless. Ivy crawled across stone statues, birds called from the trees. For the first time, she could see the beauty in the decay, the story of life continuing even after unspeakable things had happened. She passed the overgrown rose garden and, to her surprise, saw new buds beginning to form, unpruned, unchecked, but alive. Perhaps the curse had stretched beyond the house. Perhaps the land itself had suffered, and now it could begin to heal, just like her. By dusk, she had packed a small satchel, only what she needed. No relics, no souvenirs. She stood at the gates of Ravencrest, the heavy iron now rusted open. Behind her the great house loomed, not menacing but quiet, watching, waiting to be forgotten, or remembered differently. She placed a hand on the gatepost, not to say goodbye, but to say thank you, because without the house, she would never have found the truth about the curse, about her family, about herself. As she stepped onto the road that wound through the forest, she felt no fear. She didn't know where she was going. There was no map, no prophecy, but she had survived something ancient, something monstrous, and she had not only endured, it had changed her. There was power in that. A soft wind stirred the trees around her, and from far behind, so faint she almost missed it, came a whisper. Not from the house, but from the sky, from the stars, from the women who now shone among them. Thank you. Eliza smiled. She kept walking. 1 year later, the bell above the shop door jingled softly as the woman entered. Her cloak was wet with rain, and she clutched a delicate bundle wrapped in muslin. Her eyes scanned the small atelier, pausing on the bolts of silk, the sketches pinned to the walls, the scissors laid neatly beside a pot of tea. Eliza stood from behind the counter. The air smelled of lavender and wood smoke. "May I help you?" she asked gently. The woman hesitated. "They told me you make dresses that protect." Eliza tilted her head. "Who told you that?" "The stars," the woman said, half smiling. Eliza's eyes softened. "Well," she replied, stepping forward, "then let's get started." She lit a lamp. She unrolled the muslin and began to draw the first symbol, not one of captivity, but of freedom. On nights when the moon hides and the world feels older than time itself, whispered stories can still be heard among seamstresses and embroiderers in forgotten markets and mist-shrouded villages. They speak of a woman who sews dresses with symbols no one else understands, who weaves threads with intention and silence, and whose creations carry something deeper than beauty. They speak of Eliza Reed. She never returned to Ravencrest, but the world changed after her. The stories continued like the threads of a living tapestry, each client who crossed her threshold, each symbol traced by hand, each piece crafted with care and listening. What was once a ritual of entrapment became a secret language of liberation, passed from soul to soul without fanfare. An invisible thread connecting the women who dared to say no, who dared to remember, who dared to survive. There was no temple, no altar, just needle, thread, and memory. And on very silent nights, some swear they see a figure standing beneath the stars, wrapped in a deep blue dress, with eyes that hold 100 lives. She does not speak. She only sews, as if there was still something to mend or someone to save.